Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Diane Lynch, and I am the president of Stevens College, which is not why I'm here. I'm here because I am also a member of the Leadership Council of the Kopenhaver Center, and it's my privilege and my pleasure this afternoon to just sort of serve as your MC or your introducer of the various events of the afternoon. I do want to, now that I have the microphone for 3 minutes, those of you who know me know I never give up a chance. I do want to just at least have an opportunity, first of all, to thank Lillian. I've known Lillian for many, many years, back from our years together at AEJMC, the Organization for Journalists and Mass Communication Educators, where I used to admire her somewhat from afar because she represented everything about being a powerful, strong, intelligent leader among, she's down here going, right, among our peers. And so when she started the center and she reached out to me, I can't tell you how honored and privileged I feel to be a part of it. And I've watched it grow, and I've watched this event. And I'm the president, as I said, I'm a president of a women's college, and you cannot believe how much time I spend in leadership events, as you can imagine. And I never, ever miss an opportunity to sort of put my arm around a young woman and give her all kinds of advice. Where's Jada? I met one of the students here had the assignment of walking me back from lunch, and between there and here, I gave her a year's worth of advice. It's like, and this, and this, and this, and don't overshare, and this, right? And get a sponsor, and do, you know, and so, and yet this morning, I have to say, was so inspiring and so important, and so interactive, which is great. And so again, Lillian and the center have done such an extraordinary job bringing together role models, words of wisdom, intellect, talent, ambition, all of the things that human beings who are successful, not just women, not just men, human beings who are successful represent. So again, I hope we all do this. I get to get up here twice more, and I probably will do it again. Could you please join me in thanking Lillian for her leadership? Okay, so as you can imagine, the quality of the program continues this afternoon. We have 2 panels for you this afternoon. The first, are we there yet? And we know the answer to that. Define there. But it looks at 3 studies tracing the progress of women in a variety of media situations. I am pleased to introduce our moderator, Segev, who's the Associate Director for Research at the Kopenhaver Center, and she in turn will introduce our presenters. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think before I present our speakers for this afternoon, first of all, thank you for coming back from lunch. You know, usually people sink into the digestion phase. So thank you for coming back. Thank you for sharing with us this great conference. And I think before I present our speakers for this afternoon, I would like to come up with an announcement that maybe will boost their presentation. So we are delighted to announce that these speakers, the 3 speakers here, were selected to present their work at a research paper session in the upcoming AEJMC conference in Chicago this summer.
Congratulations, ladies.
So now, with that in mind, I'm going to introduce all of you. Our panelists today will start with the first one, Tracy Everbach from the University of North Texas. She is going to talk about her work. It's an edited book, Mediating Misogyny, Gender, Technology, and Harassment. A little bit about Tracy's background. Tracy is an associate professor of journalism in the Mayborn School of Journalism at the University of North Texas. She teaches undergraduate and graduate classes on race, gender, and media, news reporting, mass communication theories, qualitative research methods, and more. Her research focuses on women's work and leadership in journalism and on representations of race and gender in media. Her work has been published in many journals in our field, Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly, Newspaper Research Journal, Journal of Sports, Media Reports to Women, and more. She received her PhD in journalism from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and she is the former newspaper reporter, including 12 years on the city news desk at the Dallas Morning News. Tracy's work, the one that she's going to present for us today, is based on a new book that consists of original academic essays addressing the intersection of gender, technology, and media. The harassment of women has been gaining increasing visibility with contemporary incidents such as Gamergate and the public misogynistic trolling campaigns directed at celebrities, politicians, journalists, and activists. In response, women are using the internet as a space for consciousness raising, feminist activism, collective storytelling, and resistance to gender-based harassment. The book analyzes the mediation of gender-based harassment as well as the ways women are using digital media technologies to fight back against harassment, trolls, and assaults, both online and offline. This book is co-edited by Dr. Jacqueline Ryan Vickery and Dr. Tracy Everbach, and includes submissions from feminist scholars around the world. Join me in welcoming Tracy and to present her work. Tracy.
I have a clicker?
Yeah, it's right there. It's right there on the podium.
I can stand up.
Yeah, better. Maybe.
Stand up, it's no problem. Okay. I need that picture of Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's where he'd start.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yes. Our president. Okay, so this is a new book, and it's actually being reviewed right now. So it should be published next year, and I hope that some of you will want to use it in classes if you're a professor, or read it if you're a student. And my co-author and I, Jacqueline Ryan Vickery, who also works at the University of North Texas, we thought that this was just perfect timing for a book like this. So what we're doing, we're addressing the worldwide problems of misogyny and harassment. A lot of this is online, as you probably know, if you've read any comments section of any publication, or if you ever go on Twitter, or even Facebook. And we've kind of come to just expect these things to happen. I used to post comments on stories in, the New York Times or wherever, and finally got to the point where there were just so many trolls and so many people who were just there to try to cause problems that I just don't even try to engage with them anymore. I don't know about the rest of you. You're probably the same way. And also at the same time, we know that coverage of women is not equal to coverage of men, that women are much less likely to be sources and subjects in news stories, much less likely to have speaking roles in film, much less likely to have TV shows just dedicated to them. So it's, the term is symbolically annihilated. We are marginalized in media, even though we're 51% of the population. And social media, what we argue in the book is that social media has opened up a whole new world for misogyny to be brought out into the open. And when the internet was founded, people were very optimistic. The hopes were that, wow, this will be a new form of democracy. Everyone will have a voice. Everyone will be equal. People will be able to express their opinions, and it'll be a great new world out there. Well, we know that what's really happened is that xenophobia, racism, sexism, homophobia have all become more out in the open and more prevalent because of the internet. And it's kind of gotten to the point where harassment and abuse are just accepted as part of it. If you're going to go on Twitter, you just need to expect to have trolls harass you. And these are some of the instances in the past couple of years of things that have happened. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Gamergate, but it has to do with video games and women speaking out about how there's a dearth of women represented in video games, and when they are, they're highly sexualized. So several different women have spoken out about this and have been met with all kinds of threats, harassment, rape threats, death threats. A woman named Anita Sarkeesian has a YouTube show. She's done a series of YouTube shows called Feminist Frequency, where she discusses this and discusses the tropes in video games, and goes around and speaks at different universities. A couple of years ago, she was supposed to go speak at Utah State University. Somebody threatened the deadliest school shooting in history if she came there, and she had to cancel her talk. Some of you are familiar with what happened last summer with Leslie Jones when she was starring in the film Ghostbusters. She got trolled, sent all kinds of racist and sexist material, pictures of apes, all kinds of things from people who didn't think that there should be a Ghostbusters movie that had women in it. And then there's a video that, do we have the internet? Can we play a video? I don't know how many of you have seen this. I bet you Molly's seen it.
I have it right here on page 14.
Okay. I just kind of want you to watch this because this shows what women sports writers go through. Oops, we need audio.
Okay.
Hi, Sarah.
Nice to meet you, Dad.
All right, you ready to do some mean tweets?
I'm ready.
Sarah Spain sounds like a nagging wife on TV today.
Not even married yet.
Julie DeCaro is a run-of-the-mill, mediocre beat writer.
Not atrocious, not good.
Just sorta there.
I'm actually not a beat writer at all, but okay.
Sarah Spain is just a scrub muffin.
I don't even know what a scrub
I don't either.
I love muffins.
One of the players should beat you to death with their hockey stick, like before you are.
I'm just reading this.
Okay.
I mean, okay, this is why we don't hire any females unless we need our sucked or our food cooked.
Sarah Spain is a self-important know-it-all. Okay.
Just read the tweets, man. There's some mean tweets.
This dumb.
There's a lot of C word.
There's a lot of C words,
in
yeah.
there. Yeah. I hope your dog gets hit by a car, you.
Hopefully this skank Julie DeCaro is Bill Cosby's next victim. That would be classic.
I don't know what to say to that.
I don't. I think I can even say that.
I hope your boyfriend beats you. I'm sorry.
Why bring up your own rape in this story? Is it your way of firing back at critics who said you can't get any?
That's something, huh?
I'm sorry.
Okay. So I have to read all of them, right? Because, I mean,
Read them, I guess.
I hope you get raped again.
Oh.
I'm having trouble looking at you when I'm saying these things. Sarah Spain is a I would hate. Okay.
You need to be hit in the head with a hockey puck and killed. That's it.
Sorry that these were directed toward you.
I'm sorry on behalf of other people everywhere that you've had to deal with this.
I feel like I need to apologize to my mother, but that's a whole nother story.
Okay, so that campaign was one of the reasons that I wanted to work on this book after I saw that.
Julie is going to be on a panel with me in Chicago, so make sure you come.
Oh, that's great. Oh my gosh, I'll be at that one, definitely. Okay, so the election. I know someone said she was waiting for someone to get to the election. One of the reasons that we think this is so timely is because Trump made misogyny such a big part of his campaign. He made so many statements, so many outrageous statements. That one, I don't know if you can see it, it says, if Hillary Clinton can't satisfy her husband, what makes her think she can satisfy America? We know he said it a lot worse than that, too. And, of course, there was the famous pussy-grabbing video. So, to address the problem, we decided to take an interdisciplinary approach. It's also multi-method. It's from a feminist approach. We have these people from these fields involved: journalism, media studies, women's and gender studies, sociology, politics, sports, advertising, fandom, social work, and economics. And then we also address activism because we wanted to find solutions as well. So how are women fighting back? And I want to emphasize this book is not about Donald Trump. It just so happened that when we were putting it together, he seemed to
become president.
Thank you. Okay, so these are the different sections and the different chapters. As I said, this is out under review right now. We already have all the chapters written, so if the publisher, whichever publisher decides to accept it, it'll be published pretty quickly because we've already got the chapters. So how scholarly focus on just gender means just white women. Mediated misogynoir, intersecting race and gender in online harassment. And then historicizing the relationship between gender, publics, and the internet. That's all in the theory and history section at the beginning. And if you want to know more about any of these when it comes to questions, I can tell you more about these different chapters if you're interested. Okay, then we have communicating misogyny. We have one about Gamergate. So mainstreaming misogyny, the beginning of the end and the end of the beginning in Gamergate coverage. Misogyny for Male Solidarity, Online Hate Discourse Against Women in South Korea. We have Leave a Comment, Consumer Responses to Advertising featuring real women. It's about comments on the Dove campaign advertisements. A Space for Women Online Commenting Forums as Indicators of Civility and Feminist Community Building. And then, of course, Misogyny in the 2016 U.S. presidential election by Dustin Harp, if you guys know her. You'll notice, though, we do have some male authors in here, too. We have one about Comic-Con, Don't Mess with My Happy Place, Understanding Misogyny in Fandom Communities. We have the sports one, which Molly will like. I realized it was about them, not me. That's my chapter. What I did was I interviewed women who are working in sports journalism about the harassment that they get and how they deal with it. Academic activists versus social media trolls. So how academic activists deal with social media trolls. We have Michelle Ferrier wrote a chapter about Trollbusters. If you guys don't know about Trollbusters, it's a site that she created to help women who are getting harassed on the internet. Technology-based abuse, intimate partner violence, and use of information communication technologies. And then we have the activist chapter, bell hooks and consciousness raising, argument for fourth wave feminism. Then we have global anti-street harassment movement. We have feminist resistance to sexual violence and digital rape culture. Nasty women reclaiming the Twitterverse from misogyny. And then varieties of feminist counterspeech in the misogynistic online world. And then what we've asked, we've contacted some experts and asked them to write some essays at the end proposing solutions. So we have some journalists and some scholars and some other people answering these questions. You know, what can the companies do to protect users from getting harassed? How should journalists and media organizations ethically report about harassment? How can the law respond? And what should universities do to protect students and scholars who are at risk for online harassment? So it's under consideration right now by Palgrave Macmillan and Rutledge, and we hope to have it published next year. It's aimed at students, scholars, anyone else interested in it, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Well, our next presenter is Dr. Kimberly Wilmot Voss. She will present her study on well-behaved women, Janet Chosmere, and wearing pink in newspaper management. This presentation will focus on several strategies women used in newspaper management during the initial years of promotions, as well as the challenges they faced. It will draw on her 2017 book, Women Politicking Politely, Advancing Feminism in the 60s and the 70s, and the 2014 Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly article, Taking Chances and Making Changes, the Career Path and Pitfalls of Pioneering Women in Newspaper Management. The presentation is built on her work regarding getting female journalism graduates prepared for career path beyond a first job. Her approach was included in the 2014 SPJ Excellence in Journalism Conference session, Pushing for Parity, How Women Are Faring in Today's Newsroom. A little bit about Dr. Voss' bio, or Dr. Voss is a tenured associate professor at the University of Central Florida. She researches the intersection of women and mass communication in the post-World War II years through the women's liberation movement era. Her most recent book is about women, journalism, and politics. This is the one that she's going to speak about today. She is also the author of the food section Newspaper Women, and the Culinarity Community, and co-author of Madmen and Working Women, Feminist Perspectives on Historical Power, Resistance, and Otherness. She has published more than 40 articles about women and media history, including the 2014 Journalism and Mass Communication quarterly article, Taking Chances and Making Changes. It was cited in the Pointer article, APME once gave women journalists tips on how to make men feel like a boss. It was also included in the 2015 JMCQ essay, Women in the Newsroom, Status and Status, and she blogs at Women's Page History, right? womenpagehistory.com. So if you want to see what she's blogging on, go to womenspagehistory.com. I would like to welcome you to the podium.
I'll do it
right here. Perfect.
Do you need the Good afternoon. How many of you here have heard of the women's pages of newspapers?
Only the old people.
Just a few.
I was raising my hand.
Well, I hadn't either. I was born on the second last day of 1970. So by the time I got into newspapers, the women's pages were long gone. And the reason that most of you have not heard of the women's pages, if you're of a younger generation, is newspapers are very embarrassed about this time period. They're very embarrassed that they segregated women into the women's section, because that's literally the only place you could work at most newspapers. You were in a separate floor, a separate room. The idea was that these women weren't tough enough to work with the men in the newsroom. The segregation wasn't minor. These women knew that they were marginalized, which is why newspapers are embarrassed. They shouldn't be. These women made the most of their marginalization. One of the great things is the male editors never read their sections. So they could do anything they wanted to, and they did. But let's just start out what people do know about the content of the women's pages. They're known for the 4 Fs: fashion, family, food, and furnishing, or what many editors called fluff, which is a really easy way to marginalize women's interests, isn't it? Oh, it's fluff, it doesn't have any value. But think about what matters to you every day of your life, right? What you eat, what you wear, who your family is, where you, these things all really matter. But because it was a traditional content, the men didn't care to look at it. And these women's page editors were smart enough to take advantage of that. There were articles about the need for daycare in the 1950s, problems about sexual harassment before it had a name, pay inequity, all sorts of social problems of the community were in there, but they mixed it in next to recipes and fashion, right? Which means it was not threatening. And so if you want to look at where the seeds of the women's liberation movement came from, it was the women's pages of newspapers. So my book that just came out last week, Women Politicking Politely, deals with 6 women, 4 journalists, 2 government workers, in the usual places of Washington, D.C., and then the 2 more unlikely places for pre-women's liberation, Madison, Wisconsin, and Miami, Florida. And so we'll talk a little bit about Miami today, because it's very close to my heart. But what these women did was very important. But they did a lot of their work behind the scenes, and that's why they've largely been forgotten. I'm sure you've heard the expression, well-behaved women don't make history. It's a great bumper sticker, right? Well, that's garbage. If well-behaved women aren't part of history, it's the problem of historians not writing about them. That's the problem. Because history should be about all women, right? Because these women in the post-World War era, 1950s, 1960s, worked within the agency that they had. They had a certain kind of power in their community, and they used it, but as many of them said, they had to wear white gloves and lipstick when they sent their message. But they were no less successful than anyone else. So you can say, what are you here for today if our theme is breaking barriers, moving forward? Because some of the same lessons can be learned from their time. Of course, as I said, the only place most women could work at newspapers was the women's pages. And again, it actually said the women's pages. Wasn't colloquial, it's what it said about them. It said the women's pages. Sometimes women and family, but it was the women's section. There was no doubt that was their title. And so the first women that got promoted into management came, not surprisingly, out of the women's pages. And there were some mistakes and problems along the way because they didn't have things like hiring and firing power, budget management, any of those kinds of things. But the same problems the women talked about in the early 1970s could be talked about today. The lack of a clear career path going forward, lack of mentorship, and no childcare. We haven't done very well if the same issues are coming up now that were there in the 1970s. In fact, Pointer this week, if you go online, looked at newsrooms across the country and parental leave, and we're doing a horrible job as an industry. Things have not gotten better. We can still learn from these women. One of the things that people often ask is, what is the value of women in management? Why does it really matter? Because news values are supposed to be the same for everybody, right? That's the theory. We're all journalist machines. We go to journalism school, and we all come out and have the same news values. But we know it's not true. We have all sorts of studies, survey studies of editors, and men and women pick news differently. There's an expectation about just the idea of safety, for example, that's inherently different if you talk to men and women, right? We talked this morning about the coverage of rape and how different that can be, right? Just those basic concepts. The first stories of child abuse appeared in the women's pages of the newspapers in 1960. In fact, many criminal justice folks have credited the women's pages for making child abuse a crime. Because the idea used to be, as a parent, you can discipline your child however you wanted to. It was these stories that these women were hearing at hospitals where these poor children were taken, or beaten so poorly, that led to stories that led to lawmakers doing something about it. It's led to questions of ethics, as we kind of talked about this morning. There's really not two sides to child abuse. There's not two sides to domestic violence. This idea that everybody gets a voice becomes more problematic when we talk about issues, right? It's easy to say we're all objective. But if you look at these crimes in particular, about what those things mean. Vivian Castleberry at the Dallas newspaper used to do a lot of investigations, particularly having to do with treatment of children, often foster care. And she'd hold those stories until the male management went on vacation, and then she'd run them. Wow. The idea was you didn't ask permission, you asked forgiveness. And these women didn't have the kind of power that we talk about today. In other words, they weren't hiring and firing, they weren't making the big decisions, they weren't on the front pages. But these kind of women had such power in their community, they couldn't get fired because readers would have been so upset. This was a time when, pre-internet, if you needed a recipe, you called your newspaper editor and she mailed it to you. I mean, that's real connection, right? I mean, that's hyper-local, right? If we're going to talk about some of these concepts that are there. As these women went into management, particularly these firsts, and I've done a lot of work on firsts, I've started to learn that maybe we shouldn't be studying as many firsts, because the problem of the first is the burden of the first. Let's talk about what it's like to be the first woman, the first person of color. It's that extra burden that means you can't do the things that you really wanted to do. And particularly if the question had to do with motherhood. 3 of the women that I looked at, Carol Sutton, Janet Chesmere, were asked continuously, how can you do this job and take care of your kids? What are you going to do with this money? Doesn't your husband make enough money? A lot of women had pen names in the women's pages because it was an embarrassment to their husbands that they had to work. I mean, these concepts were real in this time. I like to talk about Janet quite a bit. Janet was the first executive editor at the Miami Herald in 1987. She was the third first of the research that I've done on the first. And it's nice because you can see how people learn from the mistakes. By the time Janet gets to the Miami Herald, she's been an assistant managing editor at places. She was an editor of a small newspaper in Colorado. In other words, there was a career path now. The kind of career path that men have always had to get to management, that women rarely had if they were feature writers, right? And never got to those positions of management that would get them there. Janet was kind of unique for most people going into journalism. 1 week after she graduated Boston College with a journalism degree, she married the editor of the student newspaper. And she stayed at home for the next 12 years taking care of those kids. So her first job as a journalist was at 33 years old. Daytona Beach newspaper, selling articles for $2.50 a piece. Wow. Because for the first time, her kids were in school, and she had that agency to be able to do that. But the nice thing about Janet was she was old enough to know the rules at that point in time. She was a great mentor to women, spoke quite a bit, particularly in Miami. And her statement that she always gave to young women is, don't neglect your personal life, because you can't hug a newspaper. She talked quite a bit about what we now call balance. Janet was talking about this in 1987. How do we do these things? And how do we teach young women that they don't have to give up a personal life to have a career in journalism? And so you'd mentioned Excellence in Journalism, the SPJ group. I spoke there a few years ago. And the message overall was to the young women in the room, because it was this pushing for parity, it was aimed at young women. You can't have it all. Now, if I'm a young woman listening to that message and I'm having to pick at age 19 or 20 or 21, oh, a personal life or a job, I think I'm probably going to go with a personal life and another job, right? And that's the message that I hope that young women are hearing differently. Because too often in journalism schools, it is treated that way. If you really want to be a journalist, then that's got to be it. And a real journalist covers hard news. We marginalize women and the future of female students when we do things like that. One of the young women had emailed me after, and she asked me if she became a journalist and wanted to go into management, could she ever wear pink again? Which is, as it is, that's a lot to put on one color anyway, right? But that's the internalized message that some of these young women were hearing. If they wanted to be feminine, in other words, if they wanted to do something a little differently, that wasn't what a real manager did. And I think if we want women in journalism, we want them to succeed, we want them in management, there has to be more than one style of journalist. This can't be the old days of throwing the garbage can across the room and cursing, right? We got rid of the spittoons. We need to have a broader statement of what leadership means and how it matters and the differences that it can make. Because it does matter what a woman does in management. I'd like to talk about Marge Paxson, who also spent some time in Miami. She was the fourth publisher in the Gannett chain. So by the fourth, Gannett had got it together. They had the first one, Gloria Biggs, was kind of a figurehead, but by the time they got to Marge, she had a career path. She'd done all the things that you need to do to become the boss, right? Because there's skill sets that get you there. The second place she was publisher, on her first date, she changed two things. First was the newspaper's policy on the ERA. They're now going to be pro-Equal Rights Amendment for the first time. The second thing she did was she allowed the women in the newsroom to wear pants. It's 1985. I mean, that changed the lives of these women. And she tells a story of going to Sears that week. Someone looking at her credit card and saying, "Are you the new lady publisher?" All the women have been buying pantsuits all week. I mean, these are real things that matter to people, right? And basically her message was, as long as you look respectable and doing the job you're supposed to be doing, wear what you want. But these are the small things and the big things, right, that women in management can do when they're given that opportunity. I guess I'll finish up with the discussion this morning at the very end. We talked about this idea of, do we need a revolution, right? Do we need to make a change? And I often feel like it's either or, right? We have the well-behaved women, and we have those in the revolution, as if there isn't a marriage at times between the two, and as if success doesn't often happen when we're more inclusive, right, with the concept of the sisterhood. There's a woman by the name of Charlotte Curtis, who was a pioneer at the New York Times. Big deal person. Came out of the junior league, high heels and pearls, you know, that time period. In fact, after she died, someone wrote a book questioning her feminism, as if, of course, feminism is something that we need to prove on a regular basis anyway, right? But this book questioned, was she feminist enough? Did she do enough? One of the stories I love to tell about that, Robin Morgan is known, particularly back in the 60s and 70s, as being a very radical feminist at the time. Now she's with the Women in Media Center. It's a little different message now, but back in the day, she was one of the women that went to the 1968 Miss America protest, the ones that supposedly the bra burning happened at. Although no bras were actually burned, they might as well have for as much as that. That message has gone forward. And Charlotte went on the bus with all these women, again, Pearls, Junior League, the whole bit, to take notes on what was going on. Went to file her story. Some of these women got arrested for their protest. Robin went to bail them out, and the police said, "Oh, an old lady in pearls just came and paid their bail." Charlotte Curtis went and bailed out these women. And Robin called to thank her. She said, "Just don't ever say anything. Management would never understand what had happened." But Charlotte did all these kinds of things, again, within her own well-behaved agency, if you will, to make a difference. If we're going to have women succeed, we need to have a more inclusive definition of what it means to be a leader and what it takes to get there. So thank you.
You will have to hold on with your questions to the end. We still have Molly. Molly Yanity. She's an assistant professor of journalism at Quinnipiac University in Connecticut. She earned her PhD from Ohio University after a 15-year career as a sports journalist. Her professional career the majority of which was spent at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, informs both her research and her teaching. Molly is going to talk about Are We There Yet? This is the title of her work. Are we there yet? Continuing to ask the question for women in sports and media careers. A longitudinal study. This is a longitudinal study that Molly is involved in. In 2004, Dr. Marie Hardin and Stacy Shane conducted a survey and focus groups to assess the attitudes and experiences of women in sport media. They published several articles out of this research. The paper that Molly is going to present to us is the first in a series of papers, utilizes Hardin and Shane's methods and instruments to update their research for an era that is marked by social media saturation, convergence, and societal divisiveness.
Thank you. I will take that over here. First of all, thanks for having me here. I got to come last year and talk about the seeds of this paper, and here are the flowers. So thank you for having me again. I want to talk about this and not just the numbers that we see. This was my life for pretty much the entire time I was a grown-up. Someone asked a little bit earlier, why do we need to bang down the doors of going into a locker room? Is that helpful or hurtful? And one of the things that when I was covering sports, I never needed to go in a locker room. And even less than that was what I didn't want to go in a locker room. I didn't like it at all. But the thing is that all the men got to go. And the one time I didn't go, someone was gonna say something that I needed to get. And if that's gonna be the policy, then we're all going in the locker room. So we need to keep going into the locker room if everyone is. That was just to answer that. It was bothering me. Okay. All right. Okay. Make sure I got this thing. Am I going the right way?
Well, you're holding it upside down. Okay.
Oh yeah, I guess it's over there, not here. Okay. Okay, so 2004, Marie Hardin, who is the dean for communications at Penn State, embarked upon a series of articles. And again, I'm kind of going to put my personal life into this. I have up here Marie Hardin the Great. She has published over 80 articles, co-edited books, and when we talk about mentors, she's the best one. I started grad school after my career, and every single thing I was reading about sports media, her name was in the back. And I sought her out and just started talking to her. And when you find someone who is doing what you want to do, and they are both brilliant and accessible, never let go. I'm sure I harass her way too much, but I'm not letting go. All right, so she and Stacy Shane put together a survey, and they went to the Association for Women in Sports Media's conference that year and had the women take the survey and asked them to voluntarily participate in a focus group, 2004. They came out with all of these articles, and a couple years ago, and it was actually at the Kopenhaver Fellows Luncheon in San Francisco. That was when you did your eye. Dr. Hardin was there, and of course I went to harass her again. And I asked her about this study, because here we are, 2004 feels like a really long time ago. Between 2006 and 13, we've purged about 20,000 jobs from newspapers. We had the advent of social media, namely Twitter. All these changes in our industry had happened, so I asked her if she was gonna do more with this. And she looked at me like I was insane and said, "Molly, I'm a dean now, no." And I asked her if I could see her survey and if I could run with it. And she said yes, and she gave me the survey. And here, I don't want to have it upside down this time. There we go. Yes. Okay. So I went to, believe it or not, this conference last summer was in Miami, so I got to be right up here. They had a great showing of people. We got several participants in the focus groups, but several participants also wanted to go to their different, go to the different panels, and ended up, we did some via Facebook Live, Google Chats. And then, because I work in Connecticut, there's a big media outlet you might have heard of. It's based in Connecticut. We got a few of, I'm not supposed to say their names. That was one of the, or say the names of the outlets, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
But it starts with an E?
Yeah, maybe, maybe. So we ended up going up to Bristol and doing another focus group with just people from that large worldwide leader. Okay, so we got a, I say we, this is me and my graduate assistant at the time, Nicole Gartner, and it was amazing. But the thing that first stuck out, or when we got the numbers all back, was how similar they were. Between 2016 and 2004, in 12 years, the similarities were unbelievable. All right, am I doing this the right way this time? Nope, I'm having problems. Okay, I don't even know if you can see this. If you guys want these numbers, I'd be happy to share them with you. I have them all here. But okay, so got it. Thanks. I don't use these. Okay. The first thing that jumped out was we used a lot of the numbers from the women's media centers to introduce our research. As Lauren, Ms. Wolf had said earlier, you know, these numbers come out every year, and there's 37% of newsroom staffing is in fact women. In the sports department, there's 13%. The Associated Press Sports Editors Association ranks or gets a grade every year on its gender and racial hiring. And for the fourth consecutive, they do these in 2-year terms, so 8 years, 4 consecutive Fs for hiring and gender. Why is it important that women are in newsrooms? I think that that's been discussed over and over again here. Imagine the Ray Rice scandal before the video if women had been covering that. We would never even need to see the video. We would have understood what a problem this is. The Baylor football scandal. Keep in mind that the person who did pretty much break that and report the heck out of it is Jessica Luther, obviously a woman. The Penn State, they don't like it when we call it the Penn State scandal, but the Jerry Sandusky scandal broken by a woman. These are the biggest stories of the last several years in sports, and they need more voices. So that's why it's important. So going through this, we have all kinds of different numbers that came out that will be in this article, or that are in this article. The first thing that I thought was fascinating was, but expected. When it was done in 2004, 60% of the women surveyed claimed to have worked in print media. 12 years later, it was half of that. It was only 30%. But 30% also worked in online content, and there's a slight uptick in PR. The numbers for wanting to leave were almost exactly the same, but the reasons were different. Hours and money were much bigger. That kind of surprised us a little bit. Most of the demographics were the same. That is actually, like, they're so much the same. So what actually was different? We had to add a bunch of questions into this survey because in 2004, we didn't have questions about social media. We didn't have questions about it. So this is where Tracy and my work completely folds in together. So this, to me, the most important thing that came out of this was, one, women claim, or 10% more women claim to be completely satisfied in the job, which is great. We're happier. But there's so fewer of us. The percentages are about the same, but there's so many fewer of us because of all these layoffs. And the reasons that people actually are, 50% said that their family life has suffered, just about the same. But when getting people to talk about it was different. Like with the actual, what came out of the focus groups was so different. This was a print journalist in her early 30s. She works at a large newspaper on the West Coast. She said, this is now a 24/7 job. It's always been a hard job and a long job. But when we get asked about the around-the-clock nature, I say, I'm like a doctor, just a lot less important, and I don't get paid as much. And I think about the days when someone could actually go out with their family and not have to worry about their phones. I have no idea what that world looks like. I've never been in that journalism world. Women felt that their gender is an obstacle, is not an obstacle in accessing sources, so they feel the same on that. One of the things that I thought was, this was the most interesting finding, is that in 2004, and I'm just going to let these go. I don't think you can see these real well anyway, but I will send anyone who wants this, just let me know. In 2004, 17% of those surveyed strongly agreed with the statement, sexual discrimination is a problem for women in sports. In 2016, that went from 17% to 52%. Now here's the rub on this whole thing, is that when I asked specifically, have you been threatened in your place of work, the numbers were down. Or have you been verbally or physically threatened, in different numbers were down. Want to guess where they feel the most threatened?
Online.
Online. By, I mean, in huge numbers. Everyone had to say this. And the quotes that went with it, you got a gist. I don't need to repeat all those words, but you got a gist of it, of being called this and feeling like they have to keep up on social media because that's where sources are. That's where news breaks constantly. And it's just not enough for women right now. Let me find this quote here. There was also something that also came up that was different, was a lot of women are talking about of having children too late and then getting laid off and being completely miserable over that fact. And that one made me really sad. And I think that that's a place where there's another article in there, because the sexism wasn't something that I had been ready for. But it was really because a lot of the people doing the digital work are on the camera all the time. So the sexism and the ageism really comes into play. Let me find one more thing to tell you guys. Okay, here it is. This was actually from Sarah Spain, who was in the video. While I'm tough enough not to let the words of strangers derail my career or intimidate me into not speaking my mind, if I'm being honest, the fear of a deluge of abuse has prevented me from tweeting things at times. Sometimes I'm just not up for the exhausting task of wading through insults and hatred. I understand that a certain amount of stupidity, anger, and frustration will always exist on the internet, which allows tough guys to spout off with repercussion. But I refuse to simply accept a world in which constant harassment is the norm. This wearing down of women in sports media comes across in how they feel the audience, how seriously they feel the audience takes them. And that was something else that had really shifted. In 2004, 35% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that female journalists are taken seriously by fans and consumers. In 2016, that had dropped to less than 6%. It's 35 to 6. Women feel like they have a harder time than men in the business, again, just because of that. I think that what is next for this research, this is just sort of what I'm talking about here is just the sheer numbers of that survey. But the articles that Hardin and Shane also did included how women feel about covering women's sports. And there's a real hegemonic force there that, like, I don't want to cover women's sports, I want to go cover football. That's because that's what we think, that's because that's what men take seriously. They've let us know that. That's where, if you are going to cover NFL, you're going to be on TV talking. If you cover women's sports, you're not going to be. So, and that's really a sort of a self-fulfilling, ugly prophecy. Another question that we added in that was not in 2004 was, who do you feel is responsible for changing things? And the numbers were overwhelmingly, we think men need to. But when you got the women in the focus groups, this changed almost immediately. Like, it's a first reaction to say it, and they're like, well, but we've got to do this and this and this. And I thought that was really interesting to hear how that went along. And I also think that there's a really unique study in the focus group that came out of that place in Connecticut. Because this is where you're supposed to be at the pinnacle, right? If you're working for this place, you're right there at the top. And just without the numbers or like revealing anything yet, what I saw was I'd never seen a bunch of women trying to be more like the guys. You know what I mean? Like and that's that hegemonic force that is pushing them to act that way. So that's going to be a really interesting study too, I think. Finally, in this one, in conclusion, in the 12 years since the first survey circulated, sports media have climbed a technological mountain. We have smartphones, social media, expanded access to news. That's all changed the landscapes. But these advances, plus the passage of time, have not brought with them moral evolution or increased tolerance. We've done nothing to lower career hurdles for women in the business or help them to perceive their roles in sports media more positively. Hardin and Shane had come to a very similar conclusion, obviously, but they said that if the masculine values by which the sports media complex have been defined must be exposed and scrutinized if genuine equity is to ever be achieved. The thing is I really believe that these values are absolutely exposed and scrutinized. I mean, we go to these conferences and we talk about this for days. Every woman that was up here this morning has experienced this. We know this. We're aware of them. We do scrutinize them. So why can't we change this? And I think this is, me being the commie professor, and I'm going to end up on one of those watch lists. But I'm just waiting. The problem isn't so much of the masculine values not being exposed and scrutinized, but it's really how the capitalistic practices behind them don't change and diversify. We keep these same values, and it's not just in terms of masculinity, but it's in terms of profit and power. And somehow, somewhere along the lines, those got completely interwoven, and we're having one heck of a time shaking them off. And it seems every time we take a few steps forward, something like that first slide you had happens. And here we are again. So we'll keep sitting in the back seat, and we will keep being annoying and asking, are we there yet? Okay? Thank you so much.
So now it's our time for questions to our three presenters. If you have any questions about what you have heard this afternoon, please approach the mic and just ask.
Hi.
Just try to more. No? Is it maybe it's off? Try it again.
Oh, say it again.
Hi. Okay, my name's Britton Davis. I work here at FIU. I'm actually a finance and HR liaison for our college. So I'm not in communication, but this has been a really great conference. And it's really interesting to see how your field is actually not just affecting your field, but all fields across the board. We're talking about STEM now. A lot of universities and schools are approaching this mathematics, engineering, and everything. But this is a really good conference. I'm really enjoying my time. My question for you guys would be, what can employers do to help, kind of stop this negativity that's going on and protect their employees? You're talking about this social interaction and how, women are having to deal with all this stuff. How are employers, trying to battle that and trying to help fix that and make their people feel safe?
Want me to take that? Okay, I do like wordplay stuff. Well, and if you're talking about journalists, I assume that you're talking about journalists. Some employers, some news organizations have taken some steps to try to stop the problem of online harassment through the comments sections, because that's where most of the trolling happens, in the comments sections. So, when they first started, comment sections were free-for-alls. Anybody could just come there and post whatever they wanted. And I think news organizations thought, well, this is great. We're going to hear from our readers, and we're going to get all these great suggestions. And clearly, it did not happen that way. So some have taken the steps of making people sign in and have an account, but that doesn't really help too much because you can make a fake account. Others, say the New York Times, they moderate their comments, so they'll only post ones that are approved by the moderator, but that takes a lot of resources and time. You've got to have somebody employed to do that. Some of them, I believe the Christian Science Monitor just completely did away with comment sections. which I'm in favor of. You know, and there is a debate going on in the journalism industry on whether comment sections should be there or not, because they do have some value. Sometimes people will come on and give story tips or point out something in the story that the reporter missed or something like that, but they really have been taken over by trolls, and I wish employers would do more about it.
You know, another thing for employers, you know, it's not just what the bosses say so much, but there's got to be a culture built over time. Mm-hmm. And this is something I'm working on now that has nothing to do with sports for the first time in my life. Wow. You know, you look at a place like Fox News, right? I mean, they have a policy, but starting at the very top, they have an attitude that is trickled down and makes life miserable. You know, and I remember when I worked at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, we had to go to like sexual harassment training, and after that I'd go back into the sports department, and there'd be a couple guys making jokes about it. But honestly, the two sports editors that I worked with were like, "The heck's wrong with you? Knock it off." You know, like, I mean, so I don't know that you can just say the employer can do something, except the people. It starts at the top. Do the people who own the place, or is the board of trustees, are they walking the walk and creating that atmosphere?
Good point.
I'm back up again. I'm Lorna Owens. I went to FIU, so yeah. I'm an entertainment lawyer, but because of my experience on an article, I work around the world to reduce maternal infant mortality. Glad to be in town. So what I'm hearing, and I think you laid it out and you answered it, and if we use Fox as an example, you can name and shame people, but it doesn't matter. So now, therefore, it must be the economics. So my question to the panel is, how do we move this economic argument forward? Because it was not until the economics did not make sense for Fox that they took action. What he was bringing in, they were now getting to diminishing returns. Mm-hmm. So how do we put forth this argument? Because we know what it is now.
Well, do you mind if I start? Okay. You know, the first time I remember this, I mean, it's obviously not the first time, but the first time I actually remember hearing someone in sports talk, you know, it was Bob Ryan from the Boston Globe, and I think he was on one of the ESPN talk shows, and he talked about Jason Kidd's wife. Do you remember that? Do you remember with Jason Kidd hit his wife, and it was like it was all caught on like the 911 tape. Yeah. And Bob Ryan's comment was something along the lines of, "Well, she sounds like she deserved it." Okay. And the thing was, he got, I mean, immediately, boom, he got suspended and without pay, couldn't be on the show for an extended amount of time. And I think the reason I remember this so vividly was because I hadn't seen anything professionally in sports. I hadn't seen it happen about women. You'd see it with race things, it would happen, and or dumb racial comments that someone would make, but I hadn't seen it in that kind of statement. And I don't think that ESPN is a perfect place. It's too big to start with, but they have, for the most part, they have an environment where if you're going to get on the air and say stupid things and you know, things like that, there are going to be consequences. And I am certain, knowing how ESPN could do so much more for the coverage of women's sports, for the ESPN can create a market. Look at poker, you know, I mean, like things like, they can do so many things that can create revenue. And in that case, I believe that they were like, you know, this is just part of who we are, and we're going to do it this way. Fox has not had to answer to I'm going to say something crappy, but you know, they haven't had to answer to their viewing demographics. Right. So the businesses that are giving them money are following their own sets of values. Now the thing is I think that might even still be tied into the profit part of it. Yeah. Because if I stand up and say, hey, look at us, we're you know, it's an easy target for I think what Mercedes was one of them, or that's an easy target, and it gets their name in lights for a minute. I don't think that anything is pure, like even for those companies that yanked their funding, right? I mean, but I think that there is, by saying that, you can appeal to demographics, and it's not pure, but it's still the right thing to do ultimately.
I mean, women are make 80% of consumer purchases. Yeah. So clearly, the advertisers want to cater to women. That's what did O'Reilly in. I mean, well, journalism too, because that story on the front page of the New York Times on a Sunday didn't help. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, oh, my. Anyway, so I think that activism can make a difference, because now I don't know if there, you know, I'm sure there were people who made an outcry to I know there were people who made an outcry to the advertisers, but the advertisers also realized, look, we're talking about women here. They buy our products, they make the decisions, so we don't want to piss them off. So yeah, it is an economic reason, but there's more to it. So, and I think that activism such as the Women's March has made a difference as well. Yeah. You know, suddenly all these women are out there saying, wait a minute, we don't like what's happening here. People pay attention to that. So that's my thought on it.
Yeah,
thank you.
So I had a question, but I also have a comment. In regards to bringing the argument forward economically with what happened with Bill O'Reilly, what's the connection there with Ivanka Trump's brand having been become very popular while still having that argument, while we're still, and I didn't want to make it political, but we are talking.
It all is. It's okay.
We're trying not as bipartisan, but it's like we're talking about it, but then, and we have the purse strings, like we have that power economically as consumers, women, but then it's not translating on certain levels. So what happened with Bill O'Reilly is almost the same conversation that we're trying to have with Ivanka Trump, trying to bring her and to understand. But I just want your thoughts on that. But I do have a question, so I'll come back.
What's the question?
The economic argument with why it sometimes happens and why it doesn't happen in other ways.
Well, I thought Nordstrom pulled her line.
But then I read that she's been doing really, really well, better than ever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, frankly,
and then she signed this deal with China, and I thought it was going down after the election, and people are taking notice with the protests, but it's working in her favor.
Well, 53% of white women who voted for Trump. So that could be one reason,
yeah.
Which is unfortunate, and as a white woman, that bothers me a lot. Also, but maybe people just like her designs. I don't know.
Yeah, she's really cute. But
I mean, she's not him.
I know.
So
I know. Anyway, so my question.
I
don't know. I just think, I mean, like, her name was out there so much. The thing is and I said, like, I don't think anything's like truly pure. I don't think that all those advertisers pulled off of O'Reilly because it was the right thing to do. I think they saw it as, hey,
we're
motive.
Yeah, if we're associated with this, then yeah. And I think that I have no idea what Ivanka Trump even sells. But if it's being largely made in China, it's probably stuff that's, I mean, relatively affordable, and it hits the demographic that she was talking about, right? I mean, I don't know.
I guess I just made the link because it worked in Bill O'Reilly's situation, but then it's not on the bigger national platform, international
platform. She hasn't been accused of sexual harassment.
She hasn't, so it's different. But there are other policies that underlining that would give reason to not.
Yeah, I get it. Just the association.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. Anyway.
Your question now.
I wanted to ask you about one of the chapters that you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
I'm learning a lot about feminism between the classes that I took as an undergrad, because I graduated here from FIU, and I'm divulging more into it because I don't have any other outlet online. So to your point that it's happening online, and we're getting our information from there. A lot of my interests lie with body positivity. And that pattern where we're inclusive and all bodies are love,
Yes.
that whole bit, that whole message. But then online platforms allow not only for the textbook definition of it, but allow the understanding of the spectrum of the issues. So I didn't know this, but all issues have like the extremists and then have like the more conventional message. And I mention that because on Twitter, I follow an extremist, and I'm learning more about the issue and that spectrum, but then there's a lot of backlash with mainstream online consumer messages, where now it's becoming like popular to include curvier models. That kind of conversation's happening, but it doesn't. Do you get me?
I think I know what you're talking about. And are you talking about Lindy West?
No.
Okay.
No, she's a blogger. Her name is Melissa Fabello.
Okay, I don't know her.
Okay.
Okay, so is your question
about the dove that you mentioned?
Right.
And how it relates to like online and defining certain feminist messages online.
Okay. I can tell you what the chapter's about. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. I mean, are you asking whether like, because, for example, the latest issue of Sports Illustrated had women with different body types in it.
Right, but that more companies are doing so now.
Right,
because
and more
of
companies
that.
are doing that. But yet there's still, like, my argument with that was because I had some men who know that I study this stuff say to me, look, isn't this great? They're using these curvy models. And I said, but
That's
they're
not the
still in bikinis and they're still just there so you can stare at them. And,
which is where that spectrum comes in.
Right, and it's nice that, and even though they're curvier and they're bigger, they still have the same shape.
Same look, they're still sexualized.
And the same, same kind of thing. So I don't know if that's what you're asking. I can tell you about what the chapter is and what they did. They looked at how, models are photoshopped to be able to be made ultra thin, and how that can affect women's self-esteem, and that women are defined by their appearance and how they appeal to heterosexual men. But then they looked at two campaigns. They looked at Dove's campaign for real beauty and Airy Real by American Eagle. You guys know what that is, good, because I don't. And then they looked at the comment sections, YouTube and social media, to see if if it's good to have diversity of the models. And so what they kind of found out was that the motivation was really, like you said, profit driven and disingenuous, making the efforts less meaningful. And the findings provided insight into how people use online spaces to engage in dialogue about positive and negative outcomes of real women campaigns. So I remember reading this chapter now. So there were people who would come in there and who would talk about, oh, this is good. And then somebody would come on and say, well, what about health? And then people would say, well, how do you know that someone's not healthy because they're that size? And so they found that it was actually a good thing because they were having a discussion. They were bringing the issue out into the open.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps.
It did. And if I have more questions, I'll let you know.
Okay.
You'll have to get the book.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Maria Sanchez. And my question is more about your journey as a researcher, as a faculty member, and because some of you have been in the workplace, in industry first and then transitioned, what prompted you to do that? First question. And then the next question, I work at a university as well, graduated from here, and I'm fascinated by the conversation and the thoughts, but sometimes feel that it stays within academia. So what are you doing, or what have you seen done successfully to really bring that conversation outside, given the tools that we have available? Thanks.
I'll go first. You can start.
I spend a lot of time as a public historian. So the idea there is not that I'm just publishing in journals or books, but I want real people to understand. And so it's been things like, I've worked on getting some of my women inducted into Journalism Hall of Fame, which again causes local media often to cover those things. I make sure that I blog for places that already have big followings. So I blog for Ms. Magazine, for example. Women's History Month is really big for me. But I think those conversations are really important, particularly when the women I write about, no one is going to write about them. I mean, literally, no one will write about them if I don't, which is exhausting because I could just publish in journals because that's what my bosses care about. No one's getting full professor excited to talk to the Miami Herald, you know. But I care about the people of Miami that might read that story, remember how wonderful Marie Anderson was in those kinds of conversations. Because I do think those things are really important. You know, I'm sure those of you that do publish in journals, you do wonder sometimes, does anyone read this? Right? Does it really matter? But when I wrote my book about food sections of newspapers, I probably talked to about 20 different newspapers across the country, and people are sending letters in, and this is their memories of childhood, and what they talked about with their moms and their grandmas, and they have these clipped, you know, we talk about this idea that, you know, the old days, a woman's name should be in the newspaper 3 times, right? She born, she got married, and she died. And I would argue there was a 4th time. And that's when your recipe got published in the newspaper, right? Because that meant something. Being a good cook was really important. You know, when some of these food editors died, there was letters to the editor. They never met these women, but they were in tears over it. And I do think, particularly for journalism, we shouldn't forget our readers. And I think we've gotten to a certain degree of where we are by not paying attention to readers, right? You know, I mentioned earlier the difference between hard news and soft news. Our readers have always liked soft news. They like a good narrative, right? They like the good feature stories. But if you look at curriculum time and again, the most important thing is hard news. Well, we're not listening to our readers, right? And that's really what we should be doing, is looking at that community. So it's a long answer to your question.
I'll try to keep it brief. You know, I think that what you said about publishing outside journals is really important for us because, and you said a lot of it stays in academia, and I think that's true. So I think that we do need to get our work out there. I do sometimes write blog posts for Society for Professional Journalists, other publications to try to get my research out there, try to engage in dialogue with professional journalists who are still very, very resistant to all of this stuff. I just got into an argument on Facebook with somebody yesterday about it, about, you know, that news is mostly from a white male perspective, and he was saying, well, no, that's the hook to the story. No, it's your hook to the story because you're the white male. So I think it's important that we have these conversations and that we get this stuff out there. It just, every time I try to do it, and I'm sure Molly feels the same way, and Kim too, when you try to get into these conversations with people in the professional world, they're still just so resistant to it and defensive. And then you asked about working in the professional world and then changing careers. Honestly, I worked in journalism for 14 years. I didn't see a big future in it as a woman. There weren't very many paths that I could go to get promoted, and I also, frankly, kind of got bored with it and wanted to do something where I could actually feel like I was making a difference and be able to do research that would, you know, express feminist values, because they shouldn't go over well in the newsroom. So I went, like Molly, I went back to school and got my degrees after working as a professional.
I'm still stunned I'm sitting here. I'm completely honest. My newspaper shut down in 2009, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I loved being a sports writer. I probably would have done it forever. But then, you know, like the Rocky Mountain News had closed just before the PI did, and I wanted to be a columnist eventually. I felt like I'd really hit a good stride, and then I was just like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. So I went to grad school and ended up, you know, the research is still something that's really difficult for me, exactly for the reason you just said. I was used to having thousands of people read my stuff. And when I'm like in the doldrums of this, I'm just like, no one's gonna read it anyway. And
I'll read it.
Thank you.
She'll read it.
But the thing was, I fell in love with teaching, and my greatest thrill is to have a classroom filled with wannabe sports writers, and they're all total fans. And by the end, they're like, I don't think I like sports as much. That's the thing where I'm just like, yeah, I got it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi. My question is for Tracy. There was a chapter on troll busters. I wanted to know more about that. Like, is that a way to stop trolls per se? How do you stop trolls?
It's more like a support. I can tell you what the chapter says, but it's more. There's this woman named Michelle Ferrier. I don't know if you know her, but
she's from Ohio University.
Yeah, and she saw all these. Well, she had been harassed herself when she was a journalist, and then she saw all this harassment going on. So she decided to start this website, and it's really more of a support thing. And I'm trying to find oh, here we go. Okay, so here's what she has to say. Because online harassment can result in emotional distress and may require legal and technological remedies to mitigate damage, she set up troll busters, and it suggests defensive strategies that you can take against trolls, and also tries to counter online hate with love by supporting people who are getting harassed.
Is there a way to track down?
It's
trolls?
online. I mean,
Okay.
you can look it up. It's trollbusters.org.
Okay, thank
yeah.
you.
Hi. So I'm sitting over there thinking, well, I'm not sure I'm supposed to be asking a question as well as being the.
Why
but
not?
you know what? But I have you all in one place, so I'm going to do that. I'm Diane Lynch, president of Stevens College, second oldest women's college in the country in Columbia, Missouri, right down the street from the J School. Was a journalism educator forever, founding director of the Online News Association. So all the things you're talking about fascinate me. But it just so happens that right now at this very moment, ESPN is doing a story about my little tiny college because we today are launching, we are announcing that we are the first women's college that is starting a scholarship varsity esports team.
Oh, wow.
So we are going to be, we've been working on it for a year, and they're going to play Overwatch, which is the video game, the game that is the most inclusive, diversity of the 20 characters, 11 are women. They are of all shapes, sizes, colors, types.
Awesome.
It's intentionally designed by Blizzard to be the most inclusive game. It's new, so is our team. And so we are launching in the fall. And the question I have is, we have been very concerned. It's about, it's like, okay, somebody said me about the person in charge matters, right? So it does matter that somebody in charge, women, decided we're going to do this. But as we do this, we're looking at, okay, this is going to, I believe, that esports is going to be the next football, because you can't do concussions forever. They can't afford it. And so we think of this as pioneering and getting women into what is going to be, and is already, one of the fastest growing sports in the world. But we've been very concerned about trolling. We've been very concerned about the harassment. There's a new organization called NACE, the National Association of College Esports, which is 90% of the institutions, colleges and universities that have esports have joined this organization. It's brand new, so we're a founding member of it. And there will be standards of behavior and standards of interaction to at least minimize the harassment that goes on during play, because it's horrible. And League of Legends is horrible. So, as educators, as people who care deeply about students, feminists, people who know a lot about trolls and a lot about what goes on online. If you had we now have 12. I expect when this story hits, we'll have more. Every nerd high school girl in the country is going to decide to go to a women's college today. What advice do you have for us? How do we protect them? How do we think about it? What are the rules of engagement?
I would have them start off by reading Brittany Griner's autobiography. Brittany Griner played basketball at Baylor. She's exceptionally tall. I think her book's called In My Skin.
Now,
yeah,
right?
her book's called In My Skin. She's a flawed person. I'm not gonna she actually got in some legal trouble for a domestic violence spat. But when she was in college, the trolls took to her. I mean, she has a really deep voice, pretty masculine features. When she was selected #1 by the Phoenix Mercury in the WNBA draft, she came in wearing a suit, like she wore a pantsuit, and everyone else is in dresses. And the stuff that she endured was, I couldn't believe, you know, the stuff that we saw on the mean tweets, it was way worse because it was very, very personal. And when you read her biography, you see her self-confidence and her, which, I mean, because it's not going to go away, right? I mean,
Right.
you know that.
No, right.
But
We're
I mean, it's just,
concerned
okay,
about it.
so do you love what you're doing playing this game? Do you?
They do.
I mean, there are parts of you that people are going to pick apart.
Right.
And are you ready for it?
Okay.
She really addresses that well. It's called
Good.
In My Skin.
In My Skin.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
I'd
We have
say-
a long reading list for him. I'll add it. It's going to be like that, you know. Yeah.
I'd say definitely have policies, and whatever your technology people are doing. I mean, are they only going to be playing this game on computers on campus, or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like they'll have practice just like any other athletic. 4 or
Yes.
5 hours a
Crazy.
day. They think so. That's what they say.
So I'm sure the technology people can put up firewalls of some sort, whatever. Also provide, help if they are getting harassed, someplace that they can go and talk to somebody about it. I'm sure you already have
Well,
that
we're
on
trying. But
campus.
the reason I'm picking your brains is because
Yeah.
this is new. There's nobody else to go to, right? And so
Yeah.
we're going to set these 12 or 18 or however many young women out in the world, and ESPN's like, we want pictures of them, and I said no, right? And so I mean, some of it
course.
is that
Yeah.
privacy too. But we're trying to.
Yeah.
So I'm picking your brains because you're experts in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Thank
Good
you.
luck. We want to hear how it goes.
So we will have our last question.
This is, I guess, more for Kim. I came in late, obviously, I apologize. But you mentioned, I liked when you mentioned hard and soft news, and you also had the history of what we've accomplished in the journalistic world. And I like the Irma Bombeck days and the Edna Buchanan. I love those days. But how do you get from that separation from that time to now? What do you see for now forward? We went through the Lucy days, we went through those days. Now where are we? Obviously on the electronic field. And when you mentioned hard news and soft news, for me to keep my sane mind, I guess, I kind of I go with my gut feeling, I guess, with hard news, the way it is now. And I kind of look at it as the Mad Magazine spy versus spy, and there's a counter and counter and counter. And they'll take you down the rabbit hole, and you'll have no idea what the truth is at any given point. And that's why I kind of went back to Back to the Future. So the soft news, I think, takes us into for lack of a better phrase, a cradling of our emotions and getting us back on a track of being women, whatever that spectrum definition is. But obviously the nurturing part is inherent as women. And if we're better at making those soft stories, where do you see from the last revolution of where we were granted those rights?
On a real basic level, I mean, I think in large part it goes back to the curriculum of our journalism schools. I mean, we are producing new journalists all the time, and we're telling them what's important and what's not. We certainly figured out how to fix a curriculum when we wanted to go digital, didn't we?
Sort
We
of.
decided, not completely, but we made changes, right? I mean, it's not like we're stuck in the same way. It's not that we couldn't change, right? And we've had women students as a majority of journalism majors now for decades.
Yeah.
Where have we addressed them in the curriculum? Where have we talked about female journalism students thinking about careers versus jobs, right? Where are we doing those kinds of things? Because obviously it needs to be done, right? I mean, you have the studies, we have the studies of who's graduating, and the fact that they're going into other fields, right? I've seen all sorts of amazing young women that have gone through my program, and they end up in real estate because they can control their hours. Or PR is just kind of more common. But these things are also about the realities of what we want the workforce to look like. And I love that statement from the woman this morning that talked about the millennials are going to help fix this. And I hope she's right. About this balance of life in those sorts of
We
things.
baby boomers got to get in there and help them.
And just
We
for that,
produce
right?
them.
There's got to be something that's there because we are going to, if we keep having journalism programs that make journalism sound so horrible, and that, as you said, you're always on your phone, you're always doing this, we're going to lose really talented young women. And we certainly aren't going to entice them to stay with it long enough to go into management. Right. So I think it's an overall issue because if we do these things that help young women, the workforce is going to be better off. right? Because men are going to benefit from a better work-life balance, or just the ability to have children, right? I mean, we have an entire public education system based on stay-at-home moms, right? The only ones that's winning are the people that run camps in the summer, because they expect us to be at home at spring break, right? They're the only ones that are winning, but we don't have these conversations often enough.
We'll work on it.
Yes.
Good point. That was an excellent point.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience.
Thank you.
3:15 or what?